The first step is awareness, that you have these thoughts, around 90,000 thoughts a day. We aren't even aware half the time that we've got this mental chatter going on. The best tool for that is meditation. Meditation is about sitting there and having the awareness that you're not your thoughts and noticing your thoughts. People often think it's about focusing on something, but it isn't. It's about awareness. If you're aware of your thoughts and you're like, I'm having these thoughts about money, the next step is be curious about that.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. I'm super excited to introduce Jenny Whichello. Jenny is a serial CFO who has worked for many retail startups and has had, tremendous career and I think has won some awards too. As a matter of fact, I know that. And now she's working as a head of finance for Prime membership, growth and engagement at Amazon. And more than that, she also runs a money coaching offering that she has to private individuals that's really focused on not just money coaching, but also money mindset. Welcome to Tech Careers and Money Talk, Jenny.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here.
Thank you. And so before we get, I really want to get into the money side, but because we are Tech Careers and Money Talk, I want to spend some time, walking through your career. I know that you didn't walk out of school and all of a sudden become a CFO that transformed financial organizations. And I know that a lot of those things really defined your view of money today. So, walk us through a little bit about, how you got started.
Yeah, well, my career started, I actually right out of undergrad went to work for Accenture, and I did consulting for the federal government, which I sometimes felt like was an oxymoron because we're sort of telling them how to transform and how to change, and then oftentimes they didn't really follow through with what we were doing. So I decided to go back and get my MBA, and right after I finished graduate school, I sort of stumbled into a role as a VP of finance for a fashion startup. It wasn't that an industry that I went after. And I certainly wasn't going after being a finance executive. I had no real experience at that point. I think I was about maybe 25 years old. But it just naturally became the right environment for me, this entrepreneurial environment. And so I did that for about 16 years. I was either a VP of finance or a CFO for a startup, always in the fashion industry, with one exception, when I worked for a 130-year-old British shirt maker called Turnbull and Asser, although I did take an entrepreneurial approach to running that business. But it was also never on my radar to get into tech. So when the opportunity presented itself to me, it sort of came out of the blue. It wasn't anything I was looking at. And I actually, honestly, didn't really know much about the tech industry or the big I knew of the companies,
right?
But I always thought about them within the realm of engineering. So I was approached about a finance role in tech, and I thought, well, this is interesting. I'll check this out. There's something I'm supposed to get out of this experience, even if it's just the interview process. And right? I had heard that the interview process at tech companies was very rigorous. So I thought, all right, well, at a minimum, this is good exercise, right? Like, it's good practice. Yes. But when I, prepped for the interview, because I'm one of those people that, I wasn't going to go in and sort of, phone it in. I did want to put my best effort forward. I just learned a lot about the tech industry in general that sort of blew away my expectations, or I guess my assumptions I had made, particularly around finance. I didn't realize how big and how important finance what finance was as a discipline within tech companies, and how finance roles partner directly with the business on strategic decision making. And so that really kind of piqued my interest. And ultimately, I thought, making a pivot from being an executive in retail startups to being one of thousands of finance employees in a big tech company could actually open up some doors and ways for me to grow. And so I ultimately decided I would take a chance and make the pivot.
And so getting back to the beginning of your career, right, do you think that your experience at Accenture, and I came from Accenture too, I did almost 10 years there, do you think that experience of at least it gave you a framework of skills that made you successful when you moved on to, a different industry and different roles?
Absolutely. I say that all the time. And actually I think every job interview I've ever had, I said that the experience I had at Accenture was the foundation upon which all of my success has come. Being 22 years old and thrown onto a client site. I think my first client was the U.S. Holocaust Museum in downtown D.C. We were doing
Wow.
an ERP implementation. I didn't know what ERP meant. And, being thrown in there and saying, okay, this is a congressionally mandated project to implement this ERP. And, this is the role you're going to play, and being like, I don't know what I'm doing here or what this is all about, and having to figure it out quickly. That kind of sparked that kind of turned on the entrepreneurial spark in me, because that is what it's like when you're in a startup. You're literally figuring things out as you go. You're
That's right.
making mistakes and learning quickly and pivoting. But then also working in consulting, it wasn't exactly like working in a startup, because consulting firms have a set way that they go about approaching their projects. And so
Right.
there was a regimented approach to some extent. So it was kind of merging those two together, taking a scripted approach for how we solve problems and deploy solutions, but doing it in a bit of chaos and uncertainty. And sort of, it tested you in both realms of being
Right.
able to be process driven, which I am very much even today, process driven, but also creative and strategic at the same time.
Right. And I mean, this is something that I just want to make sure that people are really hearing, that you hear when you're listening to this, is that in the other person that I interviewed previously as well too, really talked about the fact that honing your skills and getting a set of skills, getting a framework that you understand can help leverage and then move you more successfully into those startup environments, because then you have tools that help you then take the chaos and bring some
Yeah,
order to that and bring some
exactly.
structure to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that having that first consulting experience on my resume, um, it's gave me skills that I've come back to for the past 20 years.
And so list some of those. Like, this is important that I want, people to understand, like, what are key skills that you think are critical, especially when
Yeah.
you're just starting out, to focus on.
Yeah. So I think fostering a systems thinking mentality.
Mm,
So the ability to take big, uncertain um, pr- problems or issues and start to tease out the elements and break
mm,
them down, and then
yeah.
figuring out, okay, if we have this massive project and then I can break it down into these key components, which ones are more important, which ones are related to others, which ones are the priority, which ones, if I tweak this one, it's going to have a trickle down effect over here. The ability to analyze projects or problems like that was
Yeah.
critical to finding the best solution and then deploying it uh, quickly. So that's why throughout my career, I've never gone looking for companies that were in trouble or needed a
Right.
transformation. I think maybe I interviewed and I was often offered roles that I turned down because I thought I will be bored.
Right.
And so I naturally
Mhm.
weeded out companies that sort of had their stuff together, and was drawn to companies that really needed someone with that
Mm,
core approach to problem solving to come in and fix things. And that's how
right.
my career, I ended up working for a number of companies that needed to undergo transformations.
And so, for my edification, when you go and do a retail startup, is it similar to a tech startup? Do they offer you equity?
I was offered equity a couple of times. I think it sort of varies. Equity is not a massive piece of retail,
Mm,
mainly because retail companies don't necessarily hire a ton of tech people, and it's
right.
tech. I think it's technical people or people with technical skills that typically come in the door and want equity because they're helping to
Yeah.
actually build product, right? But a lot of the companies I work for were traditional brick and mortars first, and
Mm,
then eventually we added on e-commerce. So we never had huge tech infrastructure.
okay. And so, when you think about this, I know that as you started working, as a CFO, then all of a sudden you start working with owners and, again, more established executives that, have accumulated wealth, who have, a different money mindset, a different view on money. How did now your career ascension and your view on money start changing because of who you were around?
Yeah, it's interesting. I look back on my career, and I didn't realize at the time that I was learning so much about money just just doing my job, right? Even though I
Right.
was, even though I was
Yeah.
head of finance, I was learning a lot about personal finance at the same time. Often in the fashion industry, I worked for and with a lot of people that, because we were in that industry, had to make it appear as if they were better off than they were. They had to have the designer clothes. They had to have the nice apartment in downtown Soho. They had to be seen at all the expensive restaurants and things like that. And because I was the finance person, I knew that behind the scenes, they couldn't afford that lifestyle. But they felt that it was almost part of their job to do this. And so often I worked with a lot of people that had a lot of financial stress and debt, and often we're in quite a big hole. And that was my first recognition that what you see on the outside is often, and actually probably the majority of the time, not what's really behind the scenes. That you see people with nice things and you think they're very well off or they're millionaires, et cetera. And behind the scenes, they're highly leveraged and oftentimes broke. So it was the first lesson I learned. And then I went to go work for a self-made billionaire. And, I sort of expected to see the same kind of behaviors around money. And I didn't. I saw what at the time I didn't have a word for, but I later learned it was really mindfulness, mindful spending, mindful decision making, being intentional about money and investments, spending lavishly on things that really matter to you and experiences and people, and then being, I'm not a big fan of the word frugal, but being frugal with stuff that doesn't matter, and it kind of toggling between those two worlds. And ultimately what that comes down to is using your money for the kind of life that you truly want, and being smart about it. So I learned a lot of lessons, and then I took a lot of that knowledge and applied it to my own personal finances. And then now I apply it with the work that I do with clients.
To clients as well. That's great. And so I do, sticking still to the, the career side, obviously mentorship, I think, is very important when it comes to careers. What impact did mentors have on your career?
Yeah, that's a tricky question for me because, I was only an employee. Let me take that back. I became an executive very early in my career, like when I was
Yeah.
25 years old. So I didn't have a lot of time to be mentored by somebody. When I moved into executive roles, I was often, the highest person above me was the CEO or the owner of the company.
Right.
And we didn't necessarily have a mentoring relationship.
Mm.
Um, it was more of a partnership, and I was expected to oftentimes
Mm.
mentor them or to be directing them, because they're, when you work in startups, oftentimes the owners or the CEOs of the company, they've never done this before either, so they're looking
Right.
to build a team of people to tell them how to do it. So here I am, very young in my career, not having any mentors, and then
Mm.
working for someone who themselves needed mentorship. So I didn't have a lot of mentors early in my career.
Right.
What I did have was peer mentorship. So
Wow.
I was intentional about going out and building networks and getting involved in women's organizations, et cetera,
Mm.
that could fill that void for me. Now, the other component there is, despite the fact that I spent a career in the fashion industry, I only ever worked for men. And I only
Interesting.
ever, with one exception, I worked for a husband-wife couple. But I only ever worked for men predominantly, and all of my peers in the executive team were always men. And so,
Wow.
it's, there are a lot of studies that have been done that men don't really mentor women the same way they mentor men. They kind of shy
Okay.
away from that often. So even though I was sometimes working with very experienced people, they weren't open to really mentoring me. And so there was this, you know, being an executive, as you know, Chris, it can be lonely,
Yeah.
and it's even lonelier if you're the only one, if you're the only
Yes.
woman or the only person of color, you're extra lonely. And then when you work in the fashion industry, which is a creative industry, and you're the finance person, oh, you're like, you're not the most popular person. You're
Right. Right.
often,
You're bringing around the budget, and you're bringing around the
yeah.
bottom line, and they're like,
Oh,
wait, we want
yeah,
to buy the
no,
new, and you're no, we're not doing that.
exactly. We're trying to ideate over here and come up with amazing designs, and you're talking to us about money, And so that really, that that network of women that were in the same position that I was in was just critical in one, having someone there that understood what I was going through.
Yes.
But then also we could kind of support each other. And yeah, so I can't really say, aside from when I worked for that 130-year-old company, I think I mentioned before, in working for a self-made billionaire, he didn't have a ton of time to mentor me, but my exposure to him and my experiences with him, I learned so much. So I do factor that into how I operate today. And I took a lot of learnings from that experience.
Well, and I want to roll this up because this is so important for you to understand, is that, and I'm not talking to you, Jenny, I'm talking to listeners, right? Is sometimes there aren't going to be mentors, but peer mentorship is super, super valuable. And so seek out peers. And this is the tip, right? Is as your career ascends, it worked the same way for me. This is why, to me, when I heard that, I was like, yes, peer mentorship is going to be much more valuable and much more relevant as you ascend, because CEOs, the C-suite, they want the partnership. They want you to add into them, and they don't expect that they're going to be this mentor. And again, that's not everybody, but that's, and you need to build that own network. So as your career ascends, the network of peers becomes more critical. And guess what? You can start at any time in your career, because there's always people that are doing what you're doing at the same or different company that are trying to set standards, understand what it means, what's the difference between good and great, how do you accelerate your career, that want to help each other. I couldn't advocate for that more.
Absolutely. And I think it's also just really important if you are a minority in your field.
Yes.
If you're a woman in a field like finance, it's predominantly men. If you're a person of color in a field that's predominantly not very diverse, it's important for you to be assertive and take the initiative to build that network around yourself to help support you throughout your career. Because inevitably, I went through a lot of difficult situations in my career that had nothing to do with my work products or what a great employee I was, but had a lot to do with just my identity. And if I hadn't had a support system of other women around me, I probably would have thrown in the towel really early on and given up on being an executive because it was so challenging. And hopefully that'll change. I think as more women have those support systems and they get into those higher level roles, then that the overall trajectory changes for everyone. But we're not there
yet. It
does.
And I also think that, I really try and encourage and mentor people too, that if you don't find what you're looking for, create it, because other people are seeking this and they will welcome your call. If you stand up and you say, I'm a person of color and I'm doing X, I want to create a community that we talk about this, of people that, are similar, that will happen. And then you can, the learning is going to be off the chart. So huge advocate for that as well. So I want to put a bow on this career. I want to take a quick break, and then I want to come back and I want to talk about the money coaching, and I want to talk about money mindset, because this is so important. So hang on. We're going to be right back with Jenny Whichello. Okay. And now we're back. We finished up the career portion. Thank you so much for the insight. Excited about that conversation, but even more so, I want people to know that I found you on LinkedIn. And if you haven't, you want to go find Jenny Whichello on LinkedIn. There's not many Jenny Whichellos out there, here to tell you. But she talks every day about money mindset. And as I started reading it, it was something that draws me in. I read it almost every day. And it's so important because, number one, is I've had throughout my money journey a lot of tapes that I had to realize these things are getting me stuck. I also, when I went through my first IPO, I suffered from sudden wealth syndrome, where it's a psychological syndrome, imposter syndrome. I wasn't prepared for what was going to affect my mind. So I'm a huge advocate of money mindset. I really like the way that you presented, Jenny, and I know you speak a lot specifically to women, but it resonates with me. And so what I would love to understand is, where did you develop your passion for this? And then I want to talk a bit about your philosophy, because I think it's very insightful.
Yeah, sure. So I had no idea that there was even a thing called money mindset. But I read, I thought financial literacy was it. If you have financial literacy, you're set. I had financial literacy. I mean, I have 2 business degrees, and I wasn't set for a while. And
Right.
then I read A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle, which is a
Yeah.
challenging book to get through, but it opened my eyes to the fact that we're not our thoughts. And that was just literally mind blowing for me.
Yeah.
We're not our thoughts. And most of the time, we're not even in control of the thoughts that we're having. And worse, a lot of them are not serving us because they're fixations on the past, some bad experience we had or some mistake we made with money, um, or they're imaginative thoughts about what's going to go bad in the future, like what bad thing is going to happen to me. I'm going to lose all my money in the future or something, or I'm going to lose my job, etc. That's where the majority of our headspace is. The majority of our thoughts are around that. And then I learned about the subconscious mind and how it drives us to take certain behaviors, and those behaviors over time become habitual. So our subconscious mind is where our habits come from. And so then I connected the dots. If we have negative beliefs about money and we fixate on some mistake that we made or some fear that we have about money, then we will subconsciously take action to ensure that that is our reality, to make it real for us. And I love the work by Dr. Joe Dispenza, and he says our familiar past becomes our predictable future. And so we stay stuck in this loop of having the same thoughts and the same emotions associated with those thoughts, and then we take action to produce the same results, and then we have more thoughts about those bad results that we had, and the cycle continues and continues and continues. And when I had that realization, I was like, wow, like this is totally it. And I thought back on my own childhood and the experiences that my family had around money. My parents grew up very poor in Alabama. They didn't have financial literacy. We had a perfectly fine, life when I was growing up, but they could have made smarter decisions had they, one, known, but then also had they not had a poverty set point, right? So when you're a child, your subconscious is stuffed, it's like crammed full of stuff by the time you're 7, and so the things that you experience as a small child then become the way that you operate in the world. And that holds true for your relationships, your health, whether you have a problem with obesity and, things like that. Oftentimes that can be traced back to your childhood, and then what's basically sitting in your subconscious and running as a script and then driving your behaviors. And so when it comes to money, that manifests oftentimes as a scarcity mindset, so the belief that money is limited, you're going to go broke, you got to be careful with your money because, if you take any risks, you're going to lose it. And that keeps, so that's why people hoard things, or they put money under their, under their mattresses, or they don't get into investing because they're afraid, and then on the flip side is the abundance mindset, which is where we all deserve to be. And so I help my clients make that transition from a scarcity mindset, which most of us have, to an abundance mindset. And then because I have passed the CFP exam and I have all the knowledge about financial planning, once they have that abundance mindset, I can then take them down the path towards building a financial plan.
That's great. And wow, you just said a lot, but I do think that, well, but it's so true because, I know even as part of my story, it was interesting that I felt like there was more for me. I felt like I could have the IPO, I could have this big, sudden wealth event, and that's what I was really focused on and working for. What I didn't realize is that because when you don't do the mindset work, when I got to that moment, those tapes went on overdrive. And I think that happens to a lot of us in tech who we know that we can generate the wealth. We see technology working in tech, working for equity is the way to get there. And then what happens, and is very dangerous, is we then get this oversized position in a single company. We think, well, my great thinking got me there. My bad tapes are freezing me to not move from there because I don't want to mess it up. I could mess it up. I don't know what to do. I mean, a lot of these, negative thoughts, I think, creep into, a lot of, I've had those in the past, and I know that those happen to other people, many other tech employees that I've spoken to. How do you coach people through things like that?
Well, the first step is awareness. And so, there's a lot of stress, financial stress going on in the tech industry now because of so many people who have a high percentage of their compensation tied to stock, right? And so, you know, people are taking essentially a pay cut right now. And if you don't have a financial plan or you weren't prepared for that,
Yeah.
you're having a lot of stress right now, and your scarcity mindset and all your anxiety around money is probably bubbling up to the
That's
surface
right.
very quickly. So the first step is awareness. Like, you need to be aware that you have that you have these thoughts. And oftentimes,
That's
we
right.
have something around 90,000 thoughts a day. We aren't even aware half the time that we've got this mental chatter going on. So
Mm.
the first step is awareness. You need to be aware that you're having these thoughts. And the best tool for that is meditation. It's just sitting. Meditation can come in many different slices, but at the end of the day, meditation is about sitting there and having the awareness that you're not your thoughts and
Yes.
noticing your thoughts, right? And so
Yes.
it's not about focusing. People often think it's about focusing on something, but it isn't. It's about
No.
awareness. And so if you're aware of your thoughts and you're like, I'm having these thoughts about money, the next step is to be curious about that.
Mm.
Why am I having this thought? Where did this thought come from?
Mm.
What is there any are there any facts associated with this? Like, what do
That's
I know
right.
for sure? I there's a lot of talk about layoffs. People in the tech industry are worried they're going to get laid off. What are the facts that you know? Do you know you're going to be laid off? Do you know that your department is undergoing some headcount reductions? Or do you know that you saw a news article about it? And that's the
Right.
only facts that you have, right? And so really questioning our beliefs and figuring out like how much of them are really valid. Um,
Mm.
and then once you recognize that a lot of your beliefs are quite frankly garbage, then you've got to take
Yeah.
steps to intentionally rewrite them. And this is the part that feels a little silly to people. It's like, okay, well, I believe I'm bad with money because I'm bad with math, right? That's a common one I hear from a lot of women. All right, well,
Interesting.
now, yeah, so that's not true. There's plenty of people that are good with money and bad with math. Math is not a prerequisite. Especially not in 2023 when we have tons of tools and gadgets to help
Yeah.
us, right?
To automate things,
So
right?
yeah, so let's rewrite that belief. Like, you're absolutely fabulous at managing your money. That you leverage your creativity to find awesome solutions to any challenge that you face. Let's rewrite that belief. That's the part that people, oh, that feels silly. I don't believe that. It's going to take you a while to believe it. But guess what? Like,
Right.
it might feel silly doing this, trying to get yourself, coach yourself, and train yourself to believe these thoughts. But what's the alternative? To continue believing thoughts that you now know are false, right? And so
Right.
I give them a number of tools to help them start to retrain their mind to think more positive thoughts about money. But then the real kicker is, and this is part of my program that's very unique, and I haven't found anyone doing financial planning that does this, is visioning. You
Yeah.
know, oftentimes we jump right into, okay, like, you've convinced me I can be good at managing my money. Now, how much should I start saving? Pause. First,
Right.
let's ask why. Why do you want
Mm.
to save?
Yeah.
Why do you want to get out of debt? Why do you want to have this house? Why do you
Wow.
want to put your children through college? Like, why do you want these things?
Yeah.
So I coach my clients through what I call visioning, which is a process of tapping into their subconscious to surface a vision for their life.
Mm.
And that could be a vision at the height of their career, a vision at retirement, a vision at the end of their life, like at all those milestones throughout a person's life. What are you most grateful for? When you're on your deathbed, what are you going to be the most grateful
Mm.
for? When you are utterly grateful for the life you led over 100 years or whatever, what comes to the surface as being what you're most grateful for? And when people get really clear on that vision, and I give them some tools to make that vision
Right.
real to them, then we break that vision down into goals. And so here's the
Mm.
difference. If you tell somebody you need to start saving 10% of your income for retirement, okay, that's better than nothing. But are they going to be excited about that? Do they have an emotional reaction to that? No. And so
No.
the likelihood that they're going to follow through on that is, it's rare. It's low. If you tell someone, I need you to start saving 10% towards retirement because you have this vision, and that
Right.
10% is going to add up to this number, and that number is going to give you, by the time you turn 60 years old or whatever it is, the ability to travel through Europe every year, whatever their vision is.
Right. Whatever that
Then
happens
it's
to be.
sticky.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then they have an emotional reaction to it. And that's how they build and sustain momentum.
Right. And I think one of the interesting things that I've observed about your process is I've just been reading, because you put a lot out there on LinkedIn, is you have the visioning. The visioning ties to the goals, which I think is very powerful. And this is, I mean, it really worked for me as I had to, did what was it? I think Stephen Covey, right? Begin with the end in mind. You
Mm-hmm.
write your
Yeah,
eulogy and you're like, okay, wait, how do I want to back into this? And then you tie that to very tangible goals.
absolutely.
One of the things that I think that you have done that is really powerful, and it was something that my wife and I did instinctually, but I think you've really formalized it, which is, yes, you need to budget. Yes, you need to save. Yes, you need to auto invest. But there's this very strict framework, and then there's what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we have to, people can look at that very strict framework that says, okay, you need to go through your budget, once a week and do all this. And you're like, no, you need to have some pools, you need to automate, and you really give people a license to understand what works for them. And I find that what it does is it does a couple of things. You tie the intention to a next reasonable step that works for that person, that gets them
Yeah.
moving and creates momentum. And I think it's then that intention with momentum that's tied to the vision that then gets people moving where they need to go.
Absolutely, and it keeps them on the path, and so
Right?
inevitably you're gonna have hiccups. You're gonna come
Yes.
across stumbling blocks, and that, and everybody does, and then a lot of people give up because they don't have that clear vision that's pulling them forward. They're trying to push themselves down the path by tips and tricks and tactics and mechanisms and and everything, and that doesn't work. Same thing, when I was describing earlier, your thoughts become your beliefs, become your actions, become your habits, become your results. Oftentimes people look for tactical solutions to their financial problems, and they don't, to your point, Chris, start at the beginning here. You got to fix the thoughts first, right? And so, just building someone a financial plan or slapping them on a budget, it's not going to work. It might have short term, um, you might see a short term improvement in their finances, but it's not long term. It's the same as dieting. It's like, you can tell me I can only eat 1,000 calories a day and I'll do it for a week, but and I might lose weight, but like, it's not going to be sustainable. I'm not going to live the rest of my life like that, right? Um, yeah, I actually don't do. I don't. I am a budget diva because I've spent a whole career building financial forecasts and budgets and holding different people accountable to them. But in my program, we actually don't do budgets because my clients, once they've made that transition to having an abundance mindset, and then I help them adopt mindful spending habits. So they're spending from a place of intentionality. And then we have clear goals that they're working towards, and we've automated that whole process to start saving towards those goals. They don't need the budget. The budget is unnecessary because because every time they open their wallet, they're asking themselves, what do I want more? Do I want this new dress that just happened to catch my eye, or do I want that vacation that's part of my vision for this year? And when you have adopted mindfulness as your state of being, you take those pauses and then you make decisions that are in your best interest and that are aligned with your vision. And when you do so, then I have not found a client yet who has needed a budget.
I think that's so right. And it's a very holistic approach because the awareness and the attention, when you truly do have awareness, mindfulness, the money is just not going to rush out. You're going to be thinking a lot more about it. And it's not going to
Yeah.
be, I think the tapes that we get stuck in the back of our head, those impulses, it is due to a lack of awareness. And we
Yes.
do. And so this is what truly drew me to having this conversation, because I think it's so important that people really understand, how that we have to deprogram that
Mm-hmm.
we have to unpack it. And I think it's something that, changes too with every season of your life. When you get, okay, all of a sudden you have young kids, like, okay, how do I want to spend money on my kids?
Yeah.
And then also what am I showing them by how I spend my money on them?
Exactly.
All those questions come up again. And I think it gets back to that awareness and intentionality. And then this beginning with the end in mind. Like, how do you want this to end?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep. And if you're guided by that vision, and that vision is so meaningful to you that you can see and feel it coming to fruition, even if you're buried in debt and you're working a job where you're underpaid and you have inadequate savings or ability to save. If you've still got that vision, it's so crystal clear, it's going to pull you in the right direction. You're going to start to take intentional steps in the right direction. But having that is the key.
Yes, that was gold right there. And I think that that's a great point. We're going to put a bow on this section. We're going to the lightning round. And so
Sure.
I want to ask you a few questions that we ask everybody. And so what soft skill do you think helped your career the most?
Ooh, this is a good question. People don't focus enough on soft skills. Yeah, I would say hands down, listening intently.
Mm,
So you can learn a lot when you just stop talking, when you just zip it. And also, having a mindfulness practice and being able to stop the mental chatter. So just because your mouth isn't going, oftentimes your head is going. Just
wow.
stop all of that and just listen. When you listen intently, it conveys to the other party that you have a genuine interest in what they're saying and a genuine interest in them. And that's very
Right.
fruitful when it comes to earning trust, because often our conversations in finance and in business are really negotiations.
That's right.
Even if they're not painted like that, they're often we're negotiating all day long. And the best way to negotiate effectively is to earn trust and then to collaborate on a solution, both parties. And listening intently helps foster both of those.
That's great. What was the worst money advice you've ever received?
To get rid of my student loan debt. This idea that all debt is bad debt.
Yeah.
I had sold a piece of real estate that I owned in Nashville, and I took the money from that and I paid off my student loans, even though I personally wasn't bothered by the debt. But I was like, okay, well, I've been told I shouldn't have this. So I paid them
Right.
off. And then later on, I actually ran the numbers and I was like, if I hadn't taken that money and paid off those loans, what would my net worth look like now? And it would be better than it was.
Right.
And I'm not saying everybody needs to have that same perspective, but you need to, any piece of advice that you're given, particularly on money, is you need to sit with that and think about, personal finance is personal. Think about how following that advice would make you feel. And if you're being shamed into doing something, ask yourself if that shame is coming externally or if it's coming from inside.
Right.
So yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's real good. How do you keep learning?
Oh, I invest a lot of money every year in courses, in seminars, in
Mm.
retreats, and in books. I have a membership to Mind Valley, which is an excellent platform for learning. So many different topics on there. Most of my free time I've spent learning. Like I'm not lying when I say I'm a constant learner. Like I'm completely ignorant to what's on TV or what movies are out. Someone asked me about Cocaine Bear the other day, and I was like, "What in the world are you talking about?" Like,
Huh?
like I don't find any enjoyment in most of that stuff. So I spend most of my hours when I'm not working on really learning. That's where I find joy.
Oh, that's great. And then, with all of this and all you do, what do you do to recharge?
Yeah, so I honestly I love traveling, and I love staying in luxury hotels, and I love a luxury
Yeah.
spa. And so I don't spend a lot of money on stuff that doesn't matter to me. So my husband and I, we share like a 2016 car together.
Yeah.
We don't have, I could go and have a nice car, but I would rather spend lavishly on travel and self-care, and I feel like I get an ROI from that because it is how I recharge. It's how I feel refreshed and better and ready to get back into the swing of things. So that's my I guess I'd say I shouldn't use this term, but guilty pleasure.
Yeah, because I don't think you need to feel guilty over it at all. I think that's where you choose to invest, and the ROI speaks for itself.
Exactly. Yep. It's
Yeah.
part of my vision.
So, what would then be, to wrap this up, what would be the advice that you would give to your younger self? We say for working in tech, but I think, working and growing as an executive. Yeah.
Yeah. I would say don't get hung up on anything. You have a long life and a very long career. And oftentimes we get so hung up on the promotion we didn't get, the raise
Mm.
that didn't meet our expectations, the coworker that's given us, a lot of heartburn.
That's right.
And we need to step back and realize that, like, in a couple of years from now, you're not even going to remember that coworker's name. Like
Right.
most of this stuff really is not all that important. You should find ways to enjoy the current moment, to be enjoying what you're doing today. But understand that, as you progress in your career, you're going to come across all kinds of people and experiences, and some of them aren't going to be all that pleasant. And you just need to take a growth mindset to that.
Yeah.
So every time I've come into a challenging situation in my career, I've thought, why is this presenting itself to me? Why am I going through this? Like, what lesson am I supposed to be learning from this? I became an effective leader of people because I dealt with a lot of difficult personalities, and those were my tests I had to go through in order to learn
Yeah.
how to work with different kinds of people and build collaborative teams.
That's great. So thank you so much for spending the time with us today, Jenny. How
Yeah.
can people find out more about you and what you offer as a money coach?
Yeah, well, they can follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most present. I also have a platform called blissandwealth.com. I offer one-on-one coaching services through that platform, as well as a number of resources, most of which are free. And then I have a course. So I took my 3-part coaching program and I put it in course form so people could do it at their own pace,
Yeah.
and independently without having to work with a coach.
Well, we'll get those links from you and we'll make sure and put those into the episode page so that people
Awesome.
can access you there. And I want to thank you today. And for all of you listening, I just want to say thank you so much. We are a brand new podcast, so please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google, and Spotify, wherever you have a chance to do so. And then also please leave us a review. Let us know what you found helpful. And if you have something that you want to recommend to us, ask at techcareersandmoneytalk.com. Ask us. We want to understand what are your burning questions. And number 3, please tell other technology employees about this. We want this to be a resource for you so that you can learn about how to grow your career, build wealth, and reach your financial goals. Thank you so much.